So I am representing the Math Teacher Circle for Social Justice. We are based out of Connecticut, and we are now in our third academic year. And so we've sort of, taken a little bit of a different model from the traditional math circle approach, and really have just focused on workshops that have had a very clear connection and relationship with social justice mathematics. And this is one of our activities that we've been able to implement this in with teachers in math circles, and also have brought this into some school classrooms as well, which is really exciting. And so when we think about, fairness and equity and justice, and as much as these things, are buzzwordy, at the same time, like the math community has a lot to say and contribute this. And, in K-12 math, certainly your idea of fairness sort of evolves, right? As your mathematical mind evolves, right? From, equal sharing cookies equally to some proportional reasoning to, maybe statistical reasoning and outlier analysis. And certainly there's many problems beyond the list that I have here in which math tries to, quote unquote, solve this problem of fairness, from apportionment to cake cutting problem, rental harmony, stable marriage problem. There's certainly a lot of problems that we try to solve, and we try to, have some sort of equitable, fair solution. And one of these problems that we face in sort of all of our, well, actually, before I even transition to that, I just want to make a quick point about sort of a framework that we use. And so I want to say this because when we talk about math for social justice, sometimes people don't always know what that means. And so I just want to reiterate that for us, the framework that we've kind of modified it and work with is that for us to be a social justice math problem, we want to have a chance for people to interact with this third level here, and have a chance to reflect on these components of identity, diversity, and justice. And I'm circling justice because that's really about this fairness problem that arises in many, many contexts. And that's the one that I'm going to talk about here as well today. Okay. And so one fairness problem that we certainly have everywhere in the country, and every state sort of handles this differently in the US, is about public school funding. Okay. And we know that there is this is a political problem. And it's also fairly controversial, certainly because most of this comes from our own property taxes, right? And so it's almost inherently unfair by design that people who have more wealth and who pay more property taxes, they will send more money to their schools. And it sort of creates this never-ending cycle of, the schools being better because they are more resources, because the people have more money to send to them, right? And so certainly we might want to try to solve this problem and equalize it in some sort of a way. Okay. And so again, we're from Connecticut, so Connecticut will be my context today, but wherever state you are in and whatever math circle activity, you can certainly do research on this and adapt it for your own context. But in Connecticut back in the 70s, we said that, look, education, it's a fundamental right. You are entitled to quality education regardless of where you are. And since then, we have tried to mathematically, I'm not going to say solve this problem in the way that the other problems do, but at least try to create a more equitable system. Okay. And I will say that, in our state, maybe we still have some work to do here, but a lot of the money comes from, still more than half of this comes from local sources. Not a lot comes from federal, but I'm going to focus today on this sort of 3/8 purple chunk, which comes from state money. Okay. And this state money is divided using mathematical formula. Okay. For the most part. And so what I want to start, maybe engaging people in with the chat here. Okay. I would like people to list, you only have to list one, maybe you have a couple that come to mind. And the first thing to think about it is if you were trying to solve this problem or, try to create more equitable outcomes, what would your variables even be? Okay, so what factors would you consider when you're distributing some state pool of money to schools or districts? So if you could take a few seconds and put something in the chat, what would some of your variables even be to solve a problem like this? Certainly, number of students would be a logical starting point. Special education, absolutely. That would make sense. Seeing like cost of living. Well, cost of living is something that I have to try to think about what's a way to quantify that. Family income. Let's see. So something about taxes here, maybe property tax, maybe income tax. Let's see what else. Facilities, let's see. Number of schools, maybe in hand, maybe number of teachers, maybe number of staff, could be a logical needs. Needs is something absolutely. We know certain people might need more needs, but we would also need to think about, how would we quantify, some of those needs. Test scores that or standardized test scores, or maybe we think maybe that could be a problematic metric, or maybe we would want to quantify some type of achievement in some way. I mean, you've listed a lot of things that could potentially be a part of this problem, right? And I mean, again, I'm already going to say that different states are going to take different of these variables into account, okay? But certainly some of the things you've accounted for do make sense in different ways, okay? And so in this activity, which, if you come to my breakout room, I will engage you further in this activity, okay? But I at least want to sort of set this up. And so, like I said, we've done this with teachers, we've done this with students, so we've done this in different contexts. We've also done this online and in person. And so naturally, the setup of this activity is going to be a little bit different in different modalities. But so what we engage the people with, and what I'll engage you with, is about putting people in group and thinking about how we're actually going to go about dividing the set of resources. And so on the whole state level, I mean, we don't engage people with that, but we do like to give the state some context, especially when we have people from out of state. But we've got a population of about 3.6 million. We've got about over 500,000 students, near 200 school districts. And that's just talking about public schools, right? That's not even talking about, tech schools, some magnet schools, private schools. Of course, we have different categories of schools, but I mean, the pot of money we're talking about is public schools, okay? So that's just the context. And so what we engage people with, okay, is we give them either physically or some digital slide, either a Jamboard or some Excel document where they can move stuff around as tangibly as you can in a digital world. It's a little bit more fun with index cards, okay? But we basically split people into 4 groups, and we give them real data from 4 different school districts in Connecticut. And we were trying to be intentional by picking districts with similar numbers of students so that proportionality didn't throw it off. It was less about the student count and was more about the different types of populations we were dealing with. And we also give the overall statistics for the state of Connecticut. And we say these 4 as a subset of the whole state, we've got a pool of a little bit over $100 million, which is how much they actually received last year from that state money. And there's a couple of steps to this process, okay? One of them being the first that I just engaged you in, which is just thinking about our variables, and then thinking for some of those variables, how you might actually quantify some of those variables. And we give you 10 different variables. And I'm going to show you the state numbers in a second. But we give you 10 different variables. And the first thing we ask the groups to do is just engage with your district numbers, and the state numbers. And just to engage in some sort of number sense and get a sense of, do you think, maybe your district, your town should maybe get more or less than, what an average town or district might get. And then we also ask them to think, okay, of these cards we gave you and these different variables, like how many of these do you even want to use versus how many of these do you think maybe aren't, like, not to try to predict which ones are used, but just think about if you're trying to construct this and you're trying to think about how would you fairly distribute the money, maybe some of these variables aren't as important to you, right? And after they sort of engage in this initial process of reasoning with your own data, then we share the other group's data with them as well. And now they can take a deeper step and say, okay, well, my goal now is to actually propose a number out of this $106 million that your district, that you think you should get equitably. What do you think is a fair number, whatever definition you want to use? What do you think is a fair number that your district's going to get after you've understood it and you've gotten a comparison relative to the other districts in the room with you? Okay. And then sort of at the end, we go through this and we have sort of this kind of negotiation process almost where, we almost have this mini town hall and different groups are proposing their totals, and we see if that works. There's going to be a back and forth negotiation process. And then, of course, there will end up being a sort of big reveal at the end as well about how these formulas work, what variables are actually a part of this, and what the actual towns were, because the towns were a mystery to them. We just gave them the data and said District A, District B, without the actual towns. And of course, for in the Connecticut context, it actually has a lot of meaning to those different people. And so these are the 10 variables, by the way, that we share about each of the towns. And for Connecticut, these are the 10 variables. These are the statewide totals, and we give you it for your district. Okay. And so if you, I don't know, I feel like am I selling a product here, right? But if you come to my breakout room, right? I will, like I said, I will engage you a little bit further. I'll give you the data for the 4 towns we used in one iteration that we did this, and I'll have you play around with them a little bit, and then we'll talk about, the actual. I'll do a mini big reveal in my breakout room as well. So that's where I'll leave you off, and we basically have this, sort of cost splitting activity that I will be happy to engage some of you with and talk more about, some of the ways that we implemented this and how you might, try to do a version based on your state and local context.